Let's start with Blue Eyes. If you just have Ash Blossom, use it on Wishes. If you only have Imperm, use it on Spirit the Link one, even if it's at risk of being negated by Drill Beam. However, if you have 2 hand traps, I recommend using Ash Blossom on Lordly Load, then Imperm on Spirit. Ghost Ogre should ideally be used on True Light, which basically negates it when wipes your opponent's field. Bestial can be used to banish anything from their grave like Maiden, but it'll depend on how they started their combo. Impulse can also be used on Spirit, while Purge should be used either on Lordly Load if you don't have Ash for it, or on Wishes if they never activated Lordly Load. Nibiru is great against this deck because they often can't use monster effects to negate it because of Lordly Load. Duel is sometimes good depending on if they started with Primite or not, and the deck doesn't lose to board breakers because of cards like Ultimate Spirit and Drill Beam which can negate them. Against Snake Eyes Fiendsmith, which is popular with the Millennium Engine these days, use Ash Blossom and Impulse on original Sinful Spoils if they started with Diabelster, or use it on Snake Eyes Ash's second effect if they started with that, or use Ash on Zombie Vampire if they started with the Millennium Engine, so it all depends on what they started their combo with. Use Imperm on Snake Eye Ash regardless of what they start with. Also use Ogre on Senjinjin. Bestials can be used on Masquerina in their grave when they try to place it on their field. Purge should also be used on Snake Eye Ash. The deck might struggle against Nibiru but only depending on how they start their combo. Droll is not always useful, because they can do full Snake Eyes combo under Droll. The deck doesn't lose to board breakers because they usually have Desiree. Against Memento, you want to use Ash Blossom on Horse if they summoned it early, or use it on Twin Dragon if they summon that first. Imperm should also be used either on Horse or Twin Dragon, whichever they summon first. Ghost Ogre should also be used on Horse. Bestials are great against Gaddock to prevent both the summon and the recovery. Use Purge on Twin Dragon, and use Impulse on Memento Fusion or on Sleepy's Fusion effect, whatever they activate first. Droll is not the best against Memento because they usually add from grave to hand instead of deck. Nibiru is usually good against Memento if they're not playing Fiendsmith with it, especially because Appaloosa is usually summoned on your turn instead of theirs, and the deck does lose to board breakers if they're not playing Desiree. If you're playing against Adamancipator, you have to use every hand trap you have either on Curious to prevent access to block Dragon, or on Granite for the same reason. If you have Purge and they started with Millennium, use Purge on block Dragon's Surge 3 effect. Impulse is good to use on either Senjinjin or on Researcher if they're trying to summon it early. Nibiru isn't very good because they can usually get an early negate, or just play through Nibiru with block Dragon. Droll is great against a deck, because they do have to search before they search for block Dragon, so this basically negates the Surge 3 effect, and the deck has multiple negates for your board breakers. Against Tenpai, they'll use their board breakers to wipe your field and you're just left with hand traps, so you want to use Ash and Imperm on Pydra, or Ash on Jinroku if they started with that, or Ash Kaimin if that's what they started with. Ghost Ogre is good against the field spell. Purge is also good against Pydra or Kaimin, while Impulse on Jinroku or Kaimin, whatever they use first. Nibiru is useless. Droll isn't very good because they sometimes only need to search once to OTK. There goes second deck, so board breakers are also useless. If you're playing against White Forest, use Ash, Imperm, and Impulse on Esteller if they started with that. If they start with Sylvie, use Imperm on it as well since the Synchros can just avoid being targeted. Ash is also good on LZ if they start with that. Ghost Ogre should be used on Deception. Bestial is good against whatever they're trying to summon from grave. Purge can be used on Rusila if they can't chain block, or on Sylvie if you see that they can chain block Rusila. Nibiru isn't usually good against White Forest because they can get an early negate, or just play after Nibiru. Droll is great against White Forest because they do search a lot, and the deck doesn't lose to board breakers because they usually have multiple Omni negates. Next we have Yubel Fiendsmith. Always use your Ash Blossom on D-Lotus. However, if they start with Engraver, you have to use Ash on Tract, otherwise they can negate Ash. Imperm should also be used on D-Lotus as soon as they summon it, since they have less ways of playing through that than playing through a negated Spirit of Yubel. However, if they started with Fiendsmith, use Imperm on Sequence. Ghost Ogre should ideally be used Nightmare Pain. For Bestials, use them either on Lurie if you can, or Engraver if you couldn't use it on Lurie. if they didn't start with Fiendsmith, then you can use it to prevent them summoning Spirit of Yubel or D Lotus from grave. Duel is usually good against this deck depending on their hand. Nibiru is useless since they can either force it with the Fiendsmith engine or negate it with Phantom of Yubel, and they may have multiple Omni negates with Desiree or Varudras so they don't lose to board breakers. Against Branded, always save Impulse and Ash Blossom for Branded Fusion no matter how many cards they activate before that. Imperm and Purge can be used on Alubra to prevent searching Branded Fusion. Bestials are great to banish Fallen of Albaz after they activate Branded Fusion to mess up their fusion target. Nibiru isn't very good because of all the end phase activations. Duel isn't very good because they can add Branded Fusion from grave to hand, and the deck doesn't lose to board breakers. Because Light and Darkness just has 3 Omni negates. And I forgot to mention to use Ogre on Dark and Lightness Dragon to destroy it, which gets rid of all 3 Omni negates. If you're playing against Centurion, always use Imperm on Oxalate to prevent both its effects. You can also Imperm True Dea but only if they normal summoned it. Ash can be used on Chimera simply for the lack of a better target. Use Impulse on Chimera or True Dea when they're trying to summon from back row. And use Purge on Oxala. Or if you see they can't chain block it, just use Purge on Chimera. The deck does struggle against Nibiru after the new support. However, they do have good plays under Duel, and it doesn't lose to board breakers because they have multiple Omni negates. Against Kashtira, use Ash Blossom and Impulse on Theosis. As for Imperm, save it for Arise Hard on your own turn which can just win you the game. Ghost Ogre and Bestials aren't very good against Kashtira unfortunately. Use Purge on Unicorn. Nibiru isn't very because they can make Arise Heart in 4 summons. Duel also isn't very good because every searchable card they already play at 3. And the deck does lose to board breakers due to no Omni negates. If you're playing against Chimera Azamina Fiendsmith, use Ash Blossom on their starter, so Ash Sword Knight if they started with that, or Gazelle if they normal summoned it, or if they started with Apprentice, or Tract if they started with Engraver, or Deception if they started with their Azamina engine. As for Imperm, use it on the Fusion Baphomet if they don't have Codal Engrave, if they do have Codal. Then use Imperm more early on Gazelle. Ogre is ideally used on Deception. Use Bestials on whatever Baphomet sends from deck to grave. This deck searches a lot so it will struggle against Duel. Nibiru isn't very good because they have 2 engines that negate or force Nibiru early. And they can get an Omni negate or 2 to negate your board breakers. Thank you for watching. Shout out to these amazing members for all the great support. Click the link in description to become a member.